what we've got up here is, this is what a normal stress response looks like. We have a big stress, we have a big response. So it's like we have some kind of stressor in our life, an acutely stressful event, a cold shower, an intense workout, something that is demanding of the body. We have an equally similar response. So we have the stress, the body secretes an appropriate amount of stress hormones. So this is like adrenaline, cortisol, the stress hormones that we use to motivate us and fuel our response to the stress so that we can adapt and so that we can survive. Just so you know, I'm taking questions. So if you have any questions, let me know. And and then we're sensitive to it. So this isn't happening all of the time. We're having a few occasional acute stresses that cause a few acute responses. So we're very sensitive to it. So the body reacts in a very strong way, and it's sensitive to these hormones. So when the cortisol and the adrenaline and all these stress hormones are released, the body has a strong response. So it's like the hormones, the stress hormones act as a signaling molecule, and the body is very receptive to the molecule. So one molecule can do a large amount of work. One small molecule of the stress hormone can stimulate a strong response from the body. But what happens over here in this other model is we're experiencing things that aren't actually that stressful, but the body is perceiving them as extremely stressful. So this is kind of more like a chronic model. So this works if it's very acute. This is what happens with chronic stress. So we're exposed to basically a small amount of stress basically all of the time. So this fits in really nicely with the model of almost any type of chronic illness, because you're constantly like rattling your brain trying to figure out, how do I solve this problem? And that's putting you in a chronic state of stress. Like, I'm not okay where I am, I need to get out. I'm not okay where I am, my body's talking to me, I need to change something. I'm not okay where I am, I need to do something. And that's really stressful. So the body is having an even more powerful response to this because you're chronically stressed all the time. So your body basically thinks you're fighting for your life every second of every day. So it's just dumping like massive amounts of these stress hormones. So adrenaline, cortisol, all of the things that are associated with adrenal fatigue, autonomic nervous system dysregulation, things like that. It's just pumping them out all the time, massive amount. And because it's being exposed to these things all of the time, it becomes very resistant. It's not very sensitive anymore. So even with this extremely high level of stress hormones being released, we still feel like we have adrenal fatigue. So this would fit very nicely in the model of the different stages of adrenal fatigue in sort of stage 1 and 2. So on like lab testing, for example, you might not even be testing as having like a cortisol deficiency or as having adrenal fatigue, but you can be having the symptoms of it. And that's because even though your body is still able to keep up with the demand of stress hormones, it's just not responsive to them anymore. So on a test, it looks like your levels are normal, but your body just isn't listening to these stress hormones anymore. So you have the symptoms. So this is why I always say symptoms are king. Testing can be really helpful, but symptoms absolutely tell you what's going on. Your body does not lie. So if we can pick the symptoms apart, we can try and understand what's going on here. So you can see the problem with this is we've got chronic stress causing a massive response, which we're not actually very receptive to. And we need to move back to this. So we have an acute response, acute stress, which causes an acute response, and we have a big sensitivity to it. So the solution here is we actually want to encourage acute stress. So when I sort of drew this model out, I was thinking that the best solution to this would be to just avoid stress of all types. Let me just make sure that I'm getting questions. This isn't opening in the way that it usually does. Sorry. Technical difficulties does happen. Okay, here we go. So now I can see you. Let me know if you're here and let me know if you have any questions. So what we actually want to promote acute stress. So if you're in stage 3 or 4 of adrenal fatigue, where you actually have adrenal insufficiency, so you're exposed to this chronic stress on a daily basis, and like this is how much response that your body wants to produce, but you just don't have the resources. Like your adrenal glands are so tired, they can only produce a response that's like this big. So if this is the case, you definitely don't want to be doing acute stress. You still need to work on figuring out what the chronic stress is and bringing that down. But if you get to a point where you're you're still having these kinds of symptoms, but you know that you're replenishing your body well enough so that it is able to produce enough stress hormones. And it's not that you're not producing enough stress hormones, which is what's happening here. You have the stress, the response just is insufficient. If you've got to a point, so if you've moved from stage like 3 or 4 adrenal fatigue to stage 1 or 2, or you're in a place where, let me put this more into a symptoms perspective if you're not familiar with these stages. So stage 3 or 4 would really be characterized by absolutely cannot get out of bed, cannot motivate yourself to do anything. You've got that 3 p.m. slump where in the afternoon you just feel absolutely exhausted. At this point, this is probably more like your body doesn't have the resources, and we still need to work on lowering the chronic stress first before we can work on increasing the acute stress. So in that case, bring the chronic stress down, and you'd also bring all stress down. So at this point, high intensity exercise or endurance exercise or cold showers, probably not beneficial. They're actually probably doing you more harm than good. We need to work on figuring out what that chronic stress is and bringing that down. That can be gut dysbiosis, that can be environmental toxin exposures, that can be dysregulated emotions, that can be trauma, that can be a lot of different things, and it's a very individual thing. So you have to trace the root cause back, figure out what that is. If you need help with that, let me know, I can help you. So figure out what the chronic stress is, reduce that. But once you've got to a point, and this is kind of where I'm at right now in my stage of recovery, I'm at a stage now where I can mount this full response, right? I can produce as much stress hormones as I need to. My body can keep up with even this chronic stress demand. But it's just very desensitized because for the last like 5, 6, 7, 8 years of having a chronic illness, I've had extremely high levels of stress hormones all of the time, and my body just isn't so receptive to them anymore. So the solution that we want to do here is, now that I've reduced the source of chronic stress, so in this case for me this was moving out of mold, reducing all of my toxin exposures, healing all of my food sensitivities, so now I can eat anything and everything I want. I can completely nourish my body. I've gained like 30 kilos in a couple of months, which has been a remarkable experience. That's really allowed my body to nourish itself and have the resources that it needs to produce this full level of response. Like I can probably produce a response out here, right? I have the resources, my body has what it needs, but it's still not very sensitive. So what we can do to increase this sensitivity, now that I've worked on reducing the chronic stress, is to start increasing the acute stress. So this is to put your body through short periods of very intense stress. So a small experience of a very high level of stress. So this would look like a cold shower, for example, where your body is basically fighting to just keep itself alive, keep itself warm enough. This looks like high intensity interval training, high lifting heavy weights, sprinting, doing heavy intense lifting. And also you could probably throw in a little bit of cardio in there as well. I'm not as much of a big fan of cardio, but if you feel good when you do it, do it. I've just started running, apart from I have a trigger point in my leg, so I need to get that sorted out. But I've started running and that's going really well for me. That's really fun. So obviously it's pretty hard to lift weights when you can't really use one of your hands. So you want to start increasing your acute stress, which is going to make it so that chronic low level of sensitivity that you've had you're actually going to increase your sensitivity, because as you show your body what stress really is, it's going to make it so that in those so you're getting like a small like 15 to 30 minute period where you have an acute level of stress. Your body's going to produce all the stress hormones, it's going to be responsive. It might only be temporarily have a small level of responsivity, but as you keep doing this, it's going to make it so that in those times where you aren't having this acute stress, and now that you've resolved the chronic stress problem, when you're not in this acute stress, this down period means that your sensitivity is going to be building. You're going to build more sensitivity. So you have this really acute thing, and then your sensitivity to it starts building up. So the next time you have an acute stress, this level of sensitivity is going to begin to build until you get it back to a normal level of sensitivity. And I would say you can actually push this past what a normal person would experience by making sure that your chronic daily stress is very low and increase your acute stress to the absolute limit. So the highest intensity exercises, pushing yourself to absolute failure, going in doing cryotherapy, cold exposures very regularly is going to really put a very acute, high level of stress on the body. And it's going to increase your sensitivity to these stress hormones drastically and make it so that when you're not in these acutely stressful situations, your body is now so sensitized to stress hormones that it doesn't need to be constantly secreting out a high amount just to have a very small impact. So your daily stress will secrete a very small amount of stress hormones, a very small amount, maybe this little size amount, and your sensitivities will be so big that you'll have a normal level of response to it. And this enables your adrenal glands to recover, because now they're only having to output a small amount of stress hormone to have a strong physiological effect on your body. So, very interesting model as far as I'm concerned. This is something I'm actually going to put into practice myself. I am putting it into practice. It seems to be working. It just makes sense to me. So, some caveats to this, so things to be cautious with. If your issues aren't just chronic fatigues, they're not just adrenal fatigue based, they're chronic fatigue based. So I can tell you this because this was partly my experience. Having had chronic fatigue syndrome in the past, if you're going to do anything that puts an acute stress on your mitochondria when they're still damaged, that's only going to make things worse. So that's the cold showers and that's the high intensity exercise. They cause acute stress, but they also put a lot of demand on your mitochondria. If your mitochondria are damaged, so if you're stuck in the negative detox redox loop where every time you ask your mitochondria to synthesize energy for you, they're actually creating free radicals which damage other mitochondria, you're going to get stuck in this situation wherever you do a cold shower or wherever you use high intensity exercise, you're going to get awful post-exercise fatigue with extreme muscle aches, and you're just going to feel absolutely awful. That does not mean you're recovering. That's the complete opposite. You're still in that beginning stage where we have to work on figuring out what is causing this damage and stress to your body and bringing that down before we can start increasing the healthy acute stress. So very much a matter of trust your body, listen to how you feel. If you do these things, if you do like high intensity exercise, you do cold showers and it makes you feel really bad, probably don't do them. If you do them and it makes you feel bad, but then you feel really good for the rest of the day, then that's a really good sign that it's actually working and it's fitting into this model really nicely. If you do them and you feel bad while you're doing it and you feel even worse afterwards, that's a pretty good sign not to do it. So again, healing isn't really that complicated. Just listen to what your body's telling you and it will show you exactly what's working and what isn't. So ultimately, healing always comes from within. Listen to what your body is saying. It knows the way. It's trying to guide you towards that. So listen to that more than anything I say, any of my theories, anything that any doctors or any other coaches tell you. Listen to what your body's saying. That's where your healing is going to come from. So I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found this helpful. If you do have any questions about this, please let me know. And if you need any help with this, I'd be really happy to help you. So that's everything from me today. I'm going to have to run around my desk, so I'm going to turn the camera off. As I said, any questions, please let me know. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.